and welcome back to the F2 show. I'm Fraser Ford, and with me today I have three brilliant guests. I have our very own Inside F2 editor, Hannah Pruthuk, Motorsport broadcaster and presenter, Harry Benjamin, and GP Grandstand's Jim Kimberley. Coming up on today's show, the cars are back on track for the second and final Formula 2 test of the season. We'll be reviewing all of the action and discussing the key takeaways before round two. We'll be delving into the drivers' social media channels to see what they've been up to over the last few weeks. And finally, last week's announcement in Formula 1, we'll be having a look at it. Do we have a potential new venue in Formula 2 next season? We'll be discussing all. But before we get stuck into it, Hannah, the pubs are open, lockdown restrictions are loosening gradually. What have you been up to? What was the first thing you did on the 12th of April? And what have you got planned moving forward? Have you got anything planned now we're out of lockdown?
Feel bad because I probably had the least exciting, well, not least exciting, but least adventurous past couple of weeks. I've actually been at home. I'm back in North Wales with my family for Easter, so spent some time down, got to see my family. But I've actually been working, doing a placement with the Express covering Formula 1 for a week, and then off to the Independent this week. So I've been glued to my television screen. I was glued to watching the Formula E earlier, so it's been an exciting few weeks, but sadly no pubs yet.
Harry, obviously great to have you with us. What's been keeping you busy since Bahrain?
Well, I have been to the pub on several occasions, but now that's only thanks to friends who booked it about 4 weeks ago, because now if you want to book a pub anywhere, good luck. So that, and it's just, I know it's a bit cliche, but there's loads of motorsport on at the moment. So I've been glued to that and doing bits and bobs and working with that at the moment. Probably unprofessional, but I have got the IndyCar on in the background. Just been keeping myself busy with that.
Harry, please feel free, keep us updated, mate, as we're going. Just give us a shout and let us know if it's happening. Jim, how are you? Obviously, have you had time to process what an epic opening weekend or round one of the Formula 2 Championship? Have you had a bit of time to process it?
Yeah, well, it has been a great race to get into, or great 3 races to get to. I'm not quite as on brand as Harry. I've still to catch up on the Formula E, so no spoilers for me, if you don't mind. I'm going to have a little watch of that later. But yeah, I've been enjoying my time. I'm in Portugal, actually, not in the UK. So I had a lovely little trip out not too long ago, which went right past Portimao, which is very horrible because they're not allowing any fans in there. So being able to process the Formula 2 racing, and yeah, like you say, 3 great races. But yeah, it's a lovely time to start getting out of lockdown, isn't it now? So very excited to get more racing on. So my Formula E, not the IndyCar, but the Formula E is going to be my little bit of homework after this call.
Obviously, we've had the Formula 2 cars back on track for our second test of the season. For our viewers that perhaps didn't watch the test, here's a quick run through of what happened. Christian Lundgaard topped the morning and the afternoon session on day 1 of testing. Felipe Drugovich and Yuri Vips, the only other drivers to get into the 129s. Richard Verschoor topped day 2 of testing, followed by 18 other drivers who were separated by less than a second. I mean, you don't really expect anything else in Formula 2, do you? So, but it was Felipe Drugovich who had the fastest time over the 3-day test, producing the quickest time of the weekend on day 3. Oscar Piastri and Christian Lundgaard impressed in second and third. Jim, a really interesting test. Are you surprised to see Felipe Drugovich at the top of the timing sheets and perhaps Oscar Piastri and Christian Lundgaard up there as well? Are you surprised, or do you think that's fairly standard?
Not necessarily standard. Of course, we saw Drugovich having such a tough time in that first round, but it's good to see him bounce back so quickly. But he did all right in testing before the season as well. So it really comes down to how you perform on the track. And of course, the next track is Monaco. It's so different from Barcelona, but the 3 ones at top in the times, no, they're all great. Piastri's really proven that he's in the right place. Formula 2, he doesn't look out of his depth at all, but as a Formula 3 champion, he shouldn't. But yeah, hitting the top of the timesheets, he's really going to be pushing Joe and Lundgaard for that Alpine Academy top spot, that's my big thing at the moment, actually, is who's going to be the top dog of those 3, because that race, the second race at Bahrain, wow, that's, the Alpine Academy people must be rubbing their hands with glee, thinking, in what their season's going to be like.
And Hannah, how much attention can we pay to testing? I mean, Christian Lundgaard obviously set the fastest time in the first test in Bahrain. He was followed by Bent Biscow and Marcus Armstrong. But those guys, they were very quick in Bahrain, but none of them actually won a race. How much correlation is there between testing going into races? Is it something we can pay attention to, or not really?
I would say it's definitely something you should pay attention to, but not something you should necessarily read as gospel. I think testing is quite a difficult one because obviously, as Jim said, we don't kind of know how each team's done their setup. Obviously, we did have several drivers wildly off the pace, which I joked has gone the Mercedes style of sandbagging testing to maybe hide their true pace. And with Barcelona not on the calendar this year, it is quite difficult to judge. And with Formula 2 being so predictable, I'm not surprised none of them won, to be honest. But look, we all saw that Lundgaard and Armstrong had good pace during the opening round in Bahrain, but also with how chaotic the season opener was, and the fact that luck oftentimes in Formula 2 is more of a contributing factor than outright speed. So even though they were quick, other factors meant that they didn't necessarily get the win that they could have or should have deserved. I think the one thing testing does do is, in my mind, solidifies who's going to be the front runners for the season. We also Lundgaard, Djokovic, Vips, and surprisingly and unsurprisingly, the rookies of like Bashir, Lawson and Piastri getting out the blocks very quickly. And I was surprised, however, that Tickton was towards the back of the timing sheets in testing, but considering his pace in Bahrain, I don't necessarily think it is completely representative of Carlin's pace. But the one thing it will highlight for me heading into Monaco is who is comfortable with their car. Only Zhou and Boschong have driven Monaco before in an F2 car. There's about 8 drivers that have done it in other series, but it's been a while. I think when we head towards Monaco, you'll be able to see where testing has paid off. So I would say definitely important. It allows them to get that time to get comfortable in the car, but don't take it to be exactly as it came out in testing.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. Obviously, you said about Dan Tickton at the back of the timing sheets there. We don't know, as you said, Jim, we don't know what setup they've got in the car. We don't know what fuel loads they are. So, yeah, it's definitely, as you say, it's just a bit of time for them to get used to the car, and hopefully it'll pay dividends for them in Monaco. Is this test at Barcelona, is it going to give us more accurate indication of the pecking order moving forward this season? Or is it, again, we're not seeing Barcelona on a circuit, on a calendar this season. Is it just completely... who knows?
Complete waste of time. I don't know why they bothered. I think it's that. I mean, to agree with what Hannah and Jimmy said, it's that age-old thing, isn't it? Where you can't look at testing. You can't make 100% reading from it. You just can't. And especially, I think, as you say, of course, Barcelona isn't on the circuit. So in terms of one lap pace, I suppose you can make an assumption that they're not really pushing for that at that particular track. What I think is really going to be beneficial by doing it, though, at a track like this, where it's a bit more known to the majority of the drivers in the field, and because we've seen, we've got this new 3-race format, obviously, but then we've halved the amount of travel that Formula 2 is going to. And the gaps are big as well. They're much bigger between some of the races. So that's a long time off for some of the drivers. So I think this crucially gives them a chance to sort of keep their leg in, and basically to sort of build up more and more experience, because we've got a lot of rookies in the field. And, the more track time they get, especially pre-Monaco, where one crash in the wall in practice, and that's kind of your week, that sets the tone for your whole weekend. So I think the beauty of having this test is it just gives them more laps in the car to get that race strategy right, and to get them feeling more at home in the car. In terms of actual lap pace and a running order, I don't think we can really look too much into it.
It's really interesting, actually, and something that I hadn't thought about. In terms of Monaco, in the first sprint race, if a driver was to crash into the wall, and hopefully they'd be all right. But is in terms of the car, is that going to be a problem getting the car ready for sprint race 2?
Well, I mean, I'd say 100% it would be. You even see it in Formula 1 when they have a crash. The timings are tight, and of course, you've got to think of where they crash as well, because in Monaco, it's a street circuit, and it's much tighter than a lot of other street circuits in terms of access and getting a car back to the paddock and where it needs to go. That the time is doubled for everything. So one crash is going to set you back a long way, I think.
Last year, was it Schumacher having this right nightmare at Bahrain at the last rounds? How bad that will be with 3 races per weekend now at Monaco, where you will not be able to pass a driver who might be at the front. Otherwise, crashing in qualifying could be more crucial to the race success than crashing in sprint race one, because if they're starting from 20th, how are they going to progress through the grid? They will not be able to make the most of that reverse grid for the second sprint race, and they'll be out of the running for sprint race one and the feature race. That's really going to hurt them.
Now, we heard earlier about what our panel have been up to since Bahrain. We've had a look at the drivers' social media channels to see what they've been doing over the past few weeks. Championship leader Guan Yu Zhou showed off his gaming setup just in front of his collection of helmets and trophies. That is not a bad setup, I must say. Christian Lundgaard has been training hard since Bahrain, although he did get some time to sit back and relax, and that's not a bad view at all. Liam Lawson got to grips with his new Red Bull liveried car in DTM, and that is a lovely looking livery as well. And Matteo Nannini got his first outing in the HWA Formula 3 car this season. He is, of course, taking part in both Formula 2 and Formula 3 this season, so it's going to be a busy year for him. And finally, Ferrari juniors Robert Schwartzman and Marcus Armstrong were again given an opportunity to test the Ferrari 2018 Challenger, where they both racked up over 200 kilometres of running. Now, we spoke about this last time on the show, but are Ferrari giving their academy drivers a bit of a run out in the car to rack up super license points so that they can step into the car next season, potentially in an Alfa Romeo, for example? But are they also giving them a bit of time with a view to putting them in an Alfa Romeo and giving them that experience in a Formula One car, Jim?
They've got some strong drivers, they really do, and Schwartzman should be really knocking on the door. And I'd argue Giovinazzi's fine, but anonymous as well. I really couldn't tell you any standout performances, and I'm sure he does have them. So yeah, they'd want to have another option. Putting the drivers in the cars is really just a clever thing. We see Renault do it, or Alpine, as I should say now, do it, and those drivers get so much time in the cars that it really does give them additional opportunities should the position come up next season. If Ocon doesn't want to turn up this year again, that maybe one of those three could get that seat. So Ferrari doing the same thing, making sure their drivers have got experience in Formula One cars, super license, a lot of that. But it's not necessarily Ferrari ensuring that's going to happen, because if their drivers don't have a good season in Formula 2 this year, then they're not going to promote any of them. So it's for having being a company where you've got your own test track, that it's always a no-brainer that you can just shove these drivers in the cars, get them running around, get them used to the car, get the mileage. That it's not a bad fallback plan. But I don't know if we're going to see one of those drivers graduate next year, and that might be harsh, but I'm just not entirely certain that any of them will make the step up in 2022.
Interesting. Hannah, let's talk about Robert Schwartzman. He didn't have a great round in Bahrain, if probably he's being brutally honest with himself. He hasn't particularly shone in the test either. Are we looking at Robert Schwartzman, are we looking at him underperforming this season, or is it ridiculously early to say, and am I being a little bit ridiculous?
I think it's a hard one. I would say he underperformed in Bahrain. I was expecting him to be a lot quicker off the gates, to be honest, although I would say that's actually indicative of a lot of the returning drivers, was the rookies eclipsed them across the whole weekend in Bahrain. And I think that took Schwartzman by surprise. That took, I think, the Renault juniors as well. But Schwartzman needs to pull his finger out. The problem is the opening round of Bahrain reminded me a lot of him in Silverstone last year. And that was where he lost the championship. It wasn't, Mick Schumacher and Callum Atwood or Yuki Tsunoda were that much better than him. He lost his own championship by underperforming across that doubleheader in the UK. And if he continues to perform like this, I doubt whether he'll actually be able to mount a championship campaign. All that matters, no matter how much testing Ferrari give you, is they will want one of their juniors to either win or come second in the championship. And Schwartzman has to factor in Callum Aylot's still there. Yes, he's not in F2 this year because, to be honest, he didn't have anything else to prove. But he had an incredibly strong debut in GT, going from, I think it was 20th to 2nd in his stint. If he impresses there and puts in a strong performance as the Ferrari test driver, I could see him actually eclipsing and taking a spot on the F1 grid instead of Schwartzman or Marcus Armstrong.
And Harry, this is exactly what I was going to ask you, what Hannah's just said. If it's not Robert Schwartzman in an Alfa Romeo, assuming Kimi Räikkönen is going to retire, of course, and he's not going to do another season in Formula One, but assuming he is going to retire, if it's not Robert Schwartzman, is it going to be Callum Ilott? Is it going to be Marcus Armstrong? Or will it be someone else?
Unless Schwartzman decides to win every race the rest of the year, I have to say, my gut instinct is Ilott deserves a seat 100%. He finished second last year, took the title fight all the way down to the end, and it was just a sheer amount of Raikkonen wasn't going anywhere. Giovinazzi, they decided to keep on for another year. Where's the space? There's only one at Haas. There just was nowhere for Callum to go. But as Hannah said, obviously had a great opener in GT. So I think the only thing that could play against Callum not getting an F1 seat is being out of the limelight, because that is so crucial, I think, for a driver's progression. These F2 drivers, they race on the same tracks on the same weekends. They are right under the spotlight of all the big bosses. Whereas the GT world, obviously he's still going to be known for that, but it's not, it's not shoved in people's faces as Robert Schwartzman might be. If Callum has a great weekend in GTs, but Schwartzman's there winning in Silverstone, you're probably going to know more about Schwartzman than you are Callum. That's the only thing I think could be a bit detrimental for Callum being out of the limelight. But that being said, I still think Callum, in terms of pecking order, it should be Callum Ilott, and then Schwartzman would, if he does well, I would assume he would take a reserve or test role and go from there, which I think is probably a good way of getting into Formula One, actually, and preparing these guys before they face the full-onness of Formula One.
I suppose one of the things we haven't spoken about in terms of that Alfa Romeo seat potentially is Théo Pourchaire, a Sauber junior driver. Is he in with a shot at that? And it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? You've got a Sauber junior driver. It's the Alfa Romeo Sauber team, but how much of a say does Sauber have? Is Théo Pourchaire going to have to go to another academy, for example? Is another academy willing to take Théo Pourchaire on? What do you think, Harry?
That is a weird one. You're right, because you think, well, how much of those seats are Sauber, Ferrari? Where does the line cross? And while Alfa Romeo are the title sponsor, and I know there's some rumblings that they might not be around past 2022. Does that mean stop the whole Ferrari tie-up? Alpine have been rumored. They've got only one team. So where do they place their junior drivers? That's they've got, as we discussed earlier, 3 incredible drivers all fighting it out in the first 3 races. And they've got Fernando Alonso, who they're probably not going to chuck out after 1 year, and Esteban Ocon, who, if he doesn't turn up this year, could be off. But are they going to put a junior in there? Who knows? So in terms of the academies and how they work, I'm actually a bit confused as to why Sauber even have one, because unless they are willing to put Théo Pourchaire and test him in old Sauber cars, I can't see an obvious route in, to be honest. And I think he's great. I think I don't think he'll be right at the top this year, but I think he needs a bit more consistency, I think, because he's already had one retirement. But not bad, a 6th place and an 8th place finish in Bahrain, so it's pretty decent considering he only got his first run out towards the end of last year. So if he does well, hey, Ferrari may pick him up.
I was going to say, he's got the time though, hasn't he? He's got
Very
the time,
young,
Pourchaire.
yeah.
He's gone in, he's young, he's gone in, this is his first season in Formula 2, right? So it's not necessarily that he has to do the jump next year, but it's I'm as confused as you when you think of that seat, and it's something that I hadn't actually thought of before for Asia, that was who's going to take these seats. Is Ferrari looked really strong last year with having Schwartzman, they had Ilott, and they had Schumacher, of course. So had 3 of the top 4 finishers from last year. That could potentially be Alpine this season with 3 drivers, but I don't know where Armstrong's going to finish. So maybe Ferrari are in a bit of a Schwartzman-only situation here, and Pourchaire could be that joker that ruins both of their days.
The other opportunity, of course, actually Ferrari can provide now is, the introduction of this hypercar in the sports car world. So although I suppose people do get blindsided if you're a Formula 2, it's F1. But actually, Ferrari, I would say, out of all the academies, provide the most opportunity, actually, because they've got 3 teams essentially on the grid, plus GTs, plus sports cars. It's a pretty, even if you're not ending up in F1, I think they're not going to, if you take Schwartzman, for example, they're not going to biff him off at the end of the year. They will find a place for him if he performs well enough.
It's April and we're talking about the driver market already. It's crazy. And by the way, this is on YouTube. So by December, when the seats are all sorted, we're going to come back to this video and see how wrong we all are. So.
I think Hannah had a really good point, which I hadn't considered, with silly season coming up. By the time Silverstone's kind of rolling around, that's almost where the drivers, and the way I say it is because it reminded me of Schwartzman Shocker at Silverstone last year, that the way that Formula 2's working this year, after Monaco, we're a quarter way through the season. That's 6 races done. And I always think in my head that, okay, well, if they're winning the championship by this point, but I don't think we're going to have another season like last year where the seats are going to be up for grabs like Red Bull come the end of the season, that people are going to be wanting to get their drivers sorted by the summer break, really. So the drivers really need to, as you quite professionally put it, pull a finger out to be getting considered for a seat in Formula One next year.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that was something that we saw quite in March time when the pandemic hit, and you had in F1 the likes of Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz signing those contracts early before the season even started. And it just snowballed and it went down through the Formula One grid into Formula 2 and it's had repercussions for several drivers' careers. I do not see F1 teams being willing to wait that long. If you look, rumours Pierre Gasly could go to Alpine possibly. So we could end up having a fight with the Red Bull juniors of Lawson and Vips and Jehan Derulo over who gets their seat. Alpine, whether they'll boot Esteban Ocon out and put one of their own juniors in, or whether they'll go for Gasly, we don't know, but there's a fight there as well. I think the Alfa Romeo situation is very interesting because Porsche is, as you say, kind of the joker in the pack, and it does, I'd say it's probably more impacted on whether Alfa Romeo remain the title sponsor, and also what happens with Giovinazzi and Raikkonen, because at least from my impression, when the deal was signed, there was a rumour that it was one seat was Ferrari's choice and one seat was Sauber's. So in my head, it was Raikkonen was Sauber's choice for his experience and Giovinazzi was there as a Ferrari junior. But then now, considering what happened last year, I'm surprised they didn't jump on the opportunity to get Mick instead of Giovinazzi, because I would have, to be honest. And whether, if Raikkonen goes, they probably will take one Ferrari junior next year and keep Giovinazzi. But then the year after, they could put Porsche in as their long-term Sauber driver. So I think he's got an advantage compared to some of the Ferrari juniors that he has that second year. That's the thing with Formula 2 now, is there's very few drivers that are making it through on their first season anymore. The second season allows them that time, and I think it's going to be what a lot of them need, because as we've seen, is even though you've got talented rookies, people are still prone to mistakes. And so I think we'll probably be having this conversation a lot over the season.
Yeah, I think so as well. Unless you put Oscar Piastri, by the way, and you come into Formula 2 and win your first race, no problem, win and cool. We'll see how it goes. Let's talk about the news that broke last weekend in Imola. Obviously, Miami was announced as the latest venue that Formula 1 are going to be going to, which I'm definitely excited about. I don't know about you guys. We've seen the track, Harry. What were your initial thoughts on the circuit? And do we want to see Formula 2 in the US and in Miami next season?
Initial thoughts on the circuit. Oh, it looks great, but is it going to be good for racing? Oh, I don't know. I think having watched the onboard that they released, the virtual onboard that they did, it looks like it's obviously very high speed. It's very much like the track I think we were supposed to have in Vietnam, which obviously never came off. But I think Formula 2 race there would be absolute carnage, to be brutally honest. But the overtaking opportunities just don't look brilliant. The key to that circuit looks like you've got to be able to, it's whoever has more speed on those incredibly long straights with the slight kinks in them. Whoever carries more speed into those is going to come out on top by the end of it. I think that's where the passing is going to occur. And then there are some late braking zones towards it in the final sector, but then it starts to get really narrow and you think, oh, you're not going to get 2 cars through there. And then it's Formula 2. Then, there's going to be 4 people trying to go into there and you think that's never going to work. So I hope proven wrong, but the fact that that Formula One and is going to Miami, I think is absolutely brilliant. Bring on another American race. Why not? It's fun. It's glamour. The Americans can do entertainment, which is what F1, is always desperately hunting for at the moment. In terms of whether Formula 2 go there, it would be all to do with cost, 100%. And the fact that the whole measure of this whole 3-race format, cutting back on races, yes, is a sustainability reason, but actually, number one, it's a cost reason. So I'd love to see it. Whether it works, if it works out in the calendar, then great. But I wouldn't be too upset if F2 didn't race there.
Hannah, W Series is obviously going to be in Austin this season in October. How keen will Formula, Harry's obviously mentioned now about cost, will Formula 2 be keen to have a race in America in terms of marketing? Obviously, Harry's mentioned it comes down to money. What do you think?
I feel like Formula 2 would want to be there for the publicity it brings to series. I think also with their lineup, they have a lot of assets in the drivers that they have, really dynamic personalities, ones that fans will go crazy for. But I'm actually kind of gutted for this year that they haven't taken Formula 2 to America. I think of W Series, Formula 3 and Formula 2. Formula 2 should have been the first one over there because it is probably the biggest series. I think W Series will have an amazing time over there. And I think there is definitely a place for promoting female drivers. I am surprised, however, that they will be joined by Formula 3 because you've in theory got Formula 2, Formula 3 and a regional Formula 3. And the lowercase series have gone to America. I feel like in terms of the calendar, I'd have put Formula 2 first for the biggest flyaway probably of the season. But overall, I would say Formula 2 needs to be front and centre as the main support series, and it needs to be in Miami next year and get that level of exposure, and hopefully will provide some exciting racing. But judging by the track, I'm not hopeful it's going to be renowned for it.
Yeah, we'll definitely wait and see. I think we spoke about it last time on the review show about the first time Formula 2 went to Baku, and I think people had a few concerns about Baku, and then it ended up just being utter carnage, didn't it? So yeah, we'll wait and see. Jim, you're in Portugal now. Do you fancy a trip to Miami next season?
If you're paying, I'll be happy to go, but I have to pour some cold water over the enthusiasm for it, because I thought it's another street track, and that, talking about Formula 2 going there, if that was for this year, half the tracks on the calendar are street circuits in Formula 2. So if you go over there and you swap out Jeddah or Baku and then you put Miami in, sure, because it's like for like. But if they were going to, the assumption they're going to run a similar calendar next year, if they were going to drop out Silverstone or Monza and put in Miami, then you're turning into a street track only series, and yeah, that wouldn't be as fun, as chaotic as Baku is and great to watch. It's just, there's too much of a lottery in it for me. Then I watched the onboard as well, and after watching the Jeddah street circuit, and I'll be happy, do this podcast again in December and be proven wrong, but I just done a lot of watching it, and I'm thinking this isn't as much racing. It's not pure racing, and it sounds really traditionalist to see it, but watching them racing at Imola, Formula 1, the other week, and seeing cars going off into gravel traps and skidding across the grass and all this, I was thrown back to the 90s and be like, yeah, this is how motorsport is, not crashing into a big concrete barrier that goes on for a kilometre down the side of the track like we see at Baku. But yeah, I think the cost stuff is quite interesting, and it comes down to where Miami sits in terms of its position in the calendar, as in, is it July, is it December, when are they putting it in there? Because W Series, you quite rightly mentioned, they're going there with a double header because they've got Cota and then they're going to Mexico City. So that is a cost saver, and Formula 3 got their season finale there. So it could be Formula 3, Cota that is, so it could be Formula 3 that have Cota and Miami as a double header in terms of a cost saving thing. That might be interesting. But yeah, I'd love to see Formula 2 go to the States and make a big splash, because I think that's the sort of racing the Americans would love, because they love the last lap drama. I don't know who's going to win 3 laps before the end of the racing. That's why NASCAR is such a big thing out there. But in terms of the track, if you're going to Miami, why aren't they racing down South Beach? They're going to a glorified car park, and that's what's really disappointed me with it. They had a race at Vegas Formula 1 years ago in a car park, and wasn't, it's not on the calendar now for a reason. So if you are going to go to a big city like Miami, have it down South Beach, or I don't know the city planning, but have it somewhere iconic in Miami. Have it in a night race or something that's going to make it a real spectacle, not go around the car park or the parking lot of whatever the arena, the racing ground. That's my cold water. It's ended up being a bit of a cold waterfall.
I love the accent as well. Nice. So a quick word on our Formula 2 graduates in Formula 1 in Imola. A difficult weekend for all three of them, really. Hannah, what did you make of Mick Schumacher's? Actually, Mick Schumacher didn't have a bad weekend. It was just the spin, wasn't it?
Yeah, overall, I think he's in a Haas. He was going to be able to do, to be honest, making it to the end of the race was a bit of a miracle, because that car is, well, they said, I think it's after the last updates they're doing the season were at Imola, and they are not improving the car for the rest of the season. So, to be honest, I feel like this may end up actually being one of the highlights of the year for him, which is actually very sad to think. But overall, it does show that the rookies, they're not going to always be on their A game from the moment they start in Formula 1, and it is going to be a kind of steep learning curve. The situation behind the safety car, behind it, not his finest moment in Formula 1 so far, I would say. But and I think the thing that surprised me was how concerned he came across over the radio. And if you've heard the audio from his engineer, I thought he did a brilliant job to calm him down, because I've never heard a driver sound so nervous on the radio before.
I want his engineer to just guide me through life. Like, don't worry, it's good. Don't worry, carry on.
Like, if you compare and say Lance Stroll, it was telling him just to drive off the fire on his brakes, and then you've got Mick Schumacher giving him probably the best advice I've heard all year. And I just think
it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay.
But I would quite happily ask his engineer to give me some advice, because that was perfect. But I think what did surprise me and impressed me so much about Mick was how much he was able to bounce back from it. He ended up having to pit for a new front wing after, I think it was 2 laps behind the safety car, when he couldn't box because the pit entry was closed. But he still managed to finish in front of his teammate Nikita Mazepin. He was managed to get that much quicker than him, and it shows how, even though the Haas is an awful car, to be honest, is how much he's learning and adapting to it. And overall, I think that says more about him than the accident does, because we all saw how many drivers went off at Imola, how many of them had accidents. Last year, George Russell binned it behind the safety car. Doesn't mean George Russell's a bad driver, just means accidents are prone to happen. And overall, I would say he just needs a bit more confidence in himself, maybe just to keep a little bit calmer when there's pressure, these situations arise. But overall, despite what happened, I'm very proud of his weekend. I think he should be as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. And as you said, George Russell did exactly the same thing last year. So we obviously had a brilliant race at Sakir, and everyone forgot all about it, didn't they? So hopefully Mick Schumacher can do the same. We're still with Haas drivers. Jim, another difficult weekend for Nikita Mazepin.
Half a second off your teammate in qualifying. I want to just briefly touch on what Hannah was saying there about, well, 2 things. Well, little shout out to my co-host Gareth on our podcast, but he did point out, and I did think about it, I don't remember if this ever happened, if a driver's ever been prevented from going in the pit lane from their own accident before, which was quite an achievement in your second race. So his father's got all the records, which Lewis is trying to tarnish a little bit now, but yeah, that's a nice little record as well. But yeah, Nikita Mazepin had a tough weekend, and it's difficult to gauge, isn't it? Both of them, the Haas. You can only compare against each other, and Schumacher loses a front wing, fair enough, assisted by the safety car that he can catch up the back of the pack, but then Schumacher finishes a hell of a distance ahead of Mazepin. All 3 of the drivers, it's easy to overlook, are racing at Imola in the wet, in Formula 1 cars, where they're not, we mentioned when the last time Mick was there, but they're racing in Formula 1 machinery in the wet at a track that they're not used to going to. It's a big ask for them. And I know you're asking about Nikita, but I don't know where he was. He was somewhere at the back and another half a lap behind Mick. But Yuki, who I rate highly, had a torrid weekend, binning it in qualifying and struggling with another spin on the safety car restart. It just shows how difficult these Formula 1 cars are compared to Formula 2. when even Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen are falling off the track on the safety car, as it was for Verstappen as well. So it's a torrid weekend for all of them, but in really challenging conditions. So we shouldn't be too surprised that all three of them struggled like they did. No one, I don't think, had a clean weekend or a clean race.
Yeah, I think you're right. And Harry, Jim's just touched on it there. Obviously, Yuki Tsunoda, he did obviously spin just after the safety car. What did you make of his weekend?
Well, he was followed by Netflix, so of course he had that curse the entire time, which didn't help him in his qualifying. Because it was a bit of a bad weekend for Yuki in terms of crashing out and rookie, I'd call them rookie errors. And it's easy to forget that, as Jim said, they're rookies. This was his second race. He still came home 12th, having started last after that huge crash. And he's had two frustrating races. His first two races have both been frustrating. And I think that outlines just how good he is and how he's already proven that he can run at the very, maybe not the very top, but as high as that AlphaTauri can go, which I think it's got. I mean, Pierre Gasly's hasn't really got the full potential of that car yet. Yuki's not far off him. And the fact he spun out after the safety car, he was in front of Hamilton at the time, I think. So he'd already worked his way up to a solid points-paying position in that crazy race. That one little, I think he caught his tyre on a curb and that just sent him round. I think Yuki showed himself to actually, once he gets rid of those little rookie mistakes, which is what he's there for. And I think the team are very open about that, because they've said, we don't want Yuki to change how he's doing anything. He'll just learn more as he goes. This was a brand new track, as we've said, for those rookies. Never raced there before in those torrid conditions. I think he did absolutely fine, considering he's a rookie, and he's going to achieve some pretty big things in Formula One. I've said it.
Again, Harry, this is on YouTube, mate.
I know. I'm sticking by it. I've got big hopes for Yuki.
He's committed. Okay. So as always, we're going to finish today with some quick fire questions for our panel. Hannah, we're going to come to you first, then we're going to go to Harry, then we're going to go to Jim. So Hannah, we're heading to Monaco next. What are the first three words that come to your mind when you hear F2 in Monaco?
I'd say on the edge.
On the edge. Nice. I like that. Okay. Harry, if you had to pick an F2 car to drive around the Monaco circuit in, what car are you going for and why?
I would go for the Carlin car.
Any reason why?
They're top of the championship.
All right, cool. Fair enough. That's a fair answer. And Jim, who do you think is going to be our championship leader coming out of round two?
Oh, that's a tough one, isn't it? Joe's got the advantage with the points, so I'm going to be really dull and say Joe, with that points advantage, is going in to Monaco will come out of Monaco still as championship leader.
Big call. Okay, guys, that's all we have time for today. Hannah, Harry, Jim, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. We will, of course, be back for the round two preview show ahead of Monaco. Please get in contact with us on Discord or any of our social media channels if you have any questions ahead of Monaco, and we will try to answer as many of those questions for you as possible. You can find all the links to all of our social media channels below, or you can also find them on our website. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure you hit the subscribe button. But from me, Fraser Ford, and all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.